All right. I think I have all of my, I's dotted and T's crossed for this, but we'll see. Today is November 5th, and it is the day when Zoran Mamdani was elected to mayoralship in New York City. And I have never been more disappointed in, I just, frankly, I haven't really solidified into a concise way how exactly this makes me feel. But I'm so angry and irritated and frankly disgusted with, I guess, young people, because it's predominantly young people. But y'all need to wake up, and especially young women. I'm over it, y'all. I am. I'm sick and tired of young women going out in the world and spouting uninformed, emotional bullshit because it sounds good. All right? There are way too many young women who are educated fools. All right? You're educated fools who are making decisions based off of vibes and feelings and perceived social clout and credit versus actual economic and social policy that's meaningful. And you're screwing it up for everybody else, all right? Because let's be honest, young women are predominantly the force majeure that has gotten us to where we are right now, okay? And it's funny how all of this stuff kind of comes together at a specific moment, because in my Miss USA video, I talked about, one of the questions where they were asked, what are financial barriers to long-term financial acquisition for young women? And I talked about it in that video, but I have a lot of beef with that question to begin with. But we have to recognize that the single greatest impact on women's ability to accrue wealth over time is us. It's us. It's women and a noted lack of financial literacy and a lack of financial, it's really just lack of financial literacy. Like, most young women are financially illiterate, and they are encouraged and encourage one another to make really poor financial decisions and accrue massive amounts of debt, whether that's from doing, spending ridiculous amounts of money on higher education that is essentially useless, and you're still going to be entering into a job market where finding a job is unbelievably difficult. And so you're graduating with enormous amounts of debt, and then you end up accruing massive amounts of credit card debt because you're trying to keep up with the Kardashians and keep up with Instagram influencers instead of making educated financial decisions. It is the single great, and it's not just young women that are doing this. Let me just caveat that. There are a lot of young men who also are making poor financial decisions, because financial literacy is a scourge across our nation when it comes to younger demographics, okay? And so, first of all, it's you. The barrier that is keeping you from establishing long-term financial security is you. It's you. It's your $8 to $10 coffee that you get every day. It's buying the latest Skims, whatever. It's credit card debt. It's education debt. It's your unwillingness to live a less consumerist lifestyle in order to benefit yourself long term with financial growth. Okay. There's also statistics that show that women start investing in their 401k later than men. 85% of women don't start investing in their retirement fund until they're like almost retired. Okay. So the barrier is you. All right. So, but that's going to be a whole nother video, but specifically about New York City and Mamdani. A lot of the reasons why he was voted in and by the demographics that he was is because of a lack of financial literacy and understanding of how the economy actually works. Okay. So before, I go too much further, let's get some facts about New York City. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, New York City, the city, not the state, New York City is the single largest economy in the United States. Okay, the single largest economy in the United States, and it is the 10th largest in the world. I'll give you exact numbers here. All right, so New York's economy is 2.3 trillion last year. Okay, it's 2.3 trillion. It's the largest single municipal economy in the United States. That's larger than Canada, Indonesia, Switzerland, Sweden, Belgium, Argentina, Austria, Iran, Norway, Nigeria, Ireland, Malaysia, the Philippines. The list goes on. Okay. It's the 10th largest economy in the world. All right. So let's pull up this. So United States is the largest economy in the world. And we are in 10th, New York City is in 10th place, just behind India, Italy, and Brazil. All right. So the 10th largest economy in the world, the single largest economy in the United States of, $2.3 trillion. And it just elected a Marxist socialist has what kind of experience running any kind of municipal government? Like, first, that, to me, there are two things that should have disqualified Mamdani to begin with. The first one being he has absolutely zero municipal or not even municipal. He has zero job experience that is applicable to running the single largest economy in the United States. Okay, he has zero experience. He's also a dual citizen. How are you going to be a dual citizen and effectively navigate an economy? You have outside interests. What do we call that? You have, oh God, there's a word for it. You have conflicting interests from the outset. So that should have been enough. All right. And thirdly, so, you don't have a job resume that if you were applying for this job in the way that everybody else has to apply for a job, he would have never been considered, ever. He just wouldn't. All right. And that's the reality. And secondly, you're a dual citizen and have openly spoken about how you're anti-American. All right. Two should just automatically be, disqualifiers. And thirdly, you are an avowed, communist who is trying to run a economy that's entirely based on capitalism. So that's certainly going to go really well, all right? And for those of you who just, because apparently a lot of you just have no concept of what this means, okay? Or how any of these policies are going to be enacted and what the long-term implications of this are going to be, okay? So what is his platform? He's talked about universal child care. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for that? There is no such thing as free, ever. There is no such thing as free. Someone is paying for it, all right? So how do you accomplish universal child care, all right? You increase taxes. You increase the cost of living because somebody has to pay for that, all right? Free buses. First of all, the MTA has been operating in a deficit forever, all right? So for those of you who don't know what a deficit is, let's look up the exact definition. The amount by which something, specifically a sum of money, is too small, okay? An excess of expenditure or liabilities over income or assets, all right? It means that you are spending more than you take in, all right? The MTA has been operating at a deficit forever, all right? So first of all, you have an organization that's already underwater. It already needs federal funding, all right? It already gets federal funding and state funding to subsidize their deficit, all right? So the MTA cannot operate at its current level without subsidies from the federal and state government, okay? So what does that mean? It means that they're not taking in enough money. They're not making money to cover their expenditures, whatever those expenditures are, all right? It's in debt. It requires assistance. So, and that's because predominantly of fare evasion and a decrease in ridership. So fare evasion, well, you've got criminals. You have a police force that is not allowed to arrest anyone, and we have catch and release laws, so it doesn't matter if you break the law anyways, so what's the point in arresting you? So you have a significant increase in fare evasion across both the subway and the buses, all right? And then on top of that, you have a decreased ridership. The subway is unsafe, all right? The subway is unsafe. Last year, we saw a video of a woman who was lit on fire while alive. She was burned alive on the New York City subway, all right? People aren't taking the subway because it's not safe. So who's going to be paying for these buses? Somebody has to pay the operating cost of these free buses. It's going to be the taxpayer, all right? Now, some of you will say, okay, well, that's all well and good, tax the rich. Okay, so let's say that they do that. Now, already the corporate tax rate in New York City is 11.5%, which is the highest in the country, all right? So you have corporations that are operating underneath the highest corporate tax rate in the country as it exists already, and you're talking about increasing that more. And beyond that corporate tax rate, the big thing is the micro financial transaction tax that he's planning on instituting. Now, what will that do? That's going to drive, well, it's going to have a serious impact, all right? But beyond tax the rich, New York State also has one of the highest individual income tax rates, okay? So he's talking about a 2% increase on 1 million and above, all right? Which, okay, that doesn't sound too bad, right? 2%. But then when you look at what the city and the state tax rate are already on income for individuals, and this is across the board, this is for everybody. there is about a 3 to 3.8% individual tax rate at the city level, and then you have an overall 4% tax rate at the state level, which means that you're coming out to 7 to 8% tax rate right now, currently. I've paid that. I've seen that come out of my personal, paychecks, all right? 8%. And that's for your average, normal, middle-class American, and even your low-income tax brackets. Even the low-income tax brackets in New York State and New York City pay about 8%, okay? And you talk about tapping on another 2% on top of that, which means that you're going to be having close to the same as the corporate tax rate, which is 11%. All right? And so, sure, you can increase that, but if you think that the people that are going to be expected to bear the burden of that tax rate don't have second, third, fourth homes in other places where the tax rate is lower, you're delusional, okay? And these people are perfectly capable of restructuring their financial plans to where they are no longer taxed as a primary resident of New York State, which means you've eliminated that band of 2%, or not 2%, you've eliminated the band of rich, okay? Because we know statistically that these people will leave. They will leave. Why? Because they can. They are not financially tied to the city the way that the average middle class or low income person is. So who is that tax burden to fund universal child care, free buses? Who's going to fund that? Your government grocery store. Who do you think is going to foot the bill for funding those once the people who have the financial and the financial capability to leave? Who do you think is going to be funding it? It's going to be you, okay? And free SUNY tuition. Nothing is free, babes. Who's going to pay for that? And the city so typically schools are funded with state taxes, federal endowmentships, or federal funding, and corporate programs outside of whatever endowment they may or may not have. The City University of New York does not have any endowments. The predominant income that they have is via tuition and federal and state funding. So if this federal funding is cut off, which they've said it will be, and state funding, okay, that's fine. But if you're going to have free tuition, where's the money going to come from? It's going to have to be overtaken by state, which means that's taxes. And then rent stabilization. I mean, shiznits, you guys. Y'all clearly don't know how this works, all right? And again, I think it comes back to what I was saying about financial literacy and a lack thereof. And I can't blame y'all entirely because it's by design. Financial literacy is something that has been strategically removed from our culture because of the economic incentives to have you not know how any of this works, all right? But, I mean, like government grocery stores. Have you talked to anybody from Cuba? Have you looked at Soviet-era Russia or Soviet-era Europe? You know, the former Eastern Bloc states? Like, there's typically long lines, shortages, poor customer service, limited variety and outdated item stockage, and chronic inefficiency. Like, look at the DMV. Look at any other government organization. Where is operation optimized? And groceries and food retailship is incredibly thin margins for success as it is. So if you're going to throw government bureaucracy on top of that, what makes you think that it's going to be successful? It's going to be another hole that they pour your tax dollars into. And I can tell you right now, this is a problem that's been pervasive within New York City to begin with. But the reason that New York City operates at a deficit, typically with its budget, it needs federal funding to help subsidize it, is because there's a lot of people who institute programs like government grocery stores and NGOs and then steal your tax dollars. Because why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? And then on top of all of that, you've got him talking about defunding the police. The police in New York are a toothless organization now as it is with the catch and release laws. So what's the point in defunding the police, right? I mean, crime in New York City is underreported and, rampant now anyways. So what's the point of defunding the police? And by saying that you're going to defund the police, okay, let's say that you do. You're going to have a significantly decrease. It's just going to result in crime. It already has. We've had people lit on fire on the New York City subway. There are stabbings, shootings, robberies every day. Every day. And the young women who post videos about how some rando illegal hauled off and whacked him in the face because they felt like it are, complain and bemoan the state of New York during situations like that. And then they vote for somebody who wants to eliminate the police even more in New York City. All right? And wants to eliminate the police, but then institute social workers instead. Brilliant, you guys, brilliant. And has also openly talked about how he wants to have 911 operators given the authority to decide whether someone should go to your house if you report a crime or not. And it already takes 45 minutes for police officers to respond. A young woman that I know had a man that turned out to be one of her neighbors try and break into her apartment that she's living in with roommates in Manhattan. It took 45 minutes for the police to arrive while they are in their apartment and a man is trying to break down the door. 45 minutes. And then he couldn't do anything. The police officer showed up, said, "Bro, you gotta let me in," and did not arrest the man. All right? But sure, defund the police. And as I was saying, rent stabilized. I got distracted by defunding the police, which is just absolute batshit insanity. Because do you know who's affected disproportionately when the police are defunded? The poor and marginalized communities. Okay, so places like the Bronx, Queens, deeper parts of Brooklyn. Those are the people that are going to be and already have been significantly impacted by the decrease in law enforcement. All right? Poor and less economically affluent neighborhoods and the marginalized are who are affected by this. Not the white people that y'all are so concerned about with what they're doing. Okay? It's not them. It's not the Upper East Side. Which the Upper East Side is also a shithole now, but whatever. And rent stabilization. So I don't think that you guys know what rent stabilization means. I really don't. Because rent stabilization doesn't mean that your rent never goes up. Your rent... My camera overheated. So I think we were talking about rent stabilization. Okay? So first of all, rent stabilization, I don't think that most of you understand what that means. It means that your rate of increase is limited to about 4% a year. Okay, it's about 2 to 4%. So it's 2% every year or 4% for every 2 years. So if you sign you live in a rent stabilized apartment, and I say this because I've lived in a rent stabilized apartment. Okay, and It doesn't mean that your rent doesn't increase. It just means that there is a cap that is arbitrarily set by the Rent Stabilization Board in New York City, which is perfectly capable of being swayed by landlords and real estate investors. But it's arbitrarily set, and currently it means that your rent is not allowed to be increased more than 2% every year. Okay, and if you do a 2-year lease renewal, they can increase your rent up to 4%. All right, so and the average New York City apartment rent right now is over $4,000 a month. Okay, and let's see. I bet we can get. Let's see. All right. So, all right. So the way that rent stabilization works is that there are a lot of limits on what is considered a rent stabilized apartment, okay? And typically it has to be a building that is built before like 1975, all right? So that means that it's all of these old, shitty buildings of, around 6 apartment units, whatever, these brownstone houses that everybody talks about, right? Well, no, there's others than that. You've got Section 8 affordable housing, but like that's not, it's not a thing. But rent stabilized apartments, like, I don't think that you guys realize how few of them there are, or like how they work, all right? Because the rent does increase, and sure, allegedly there are rent stabilized apartments that are available for, allegedly $850 to like $1,000. Find them for me, babies. Find them. Find me an apartment in New York City that is $1,000 a month. Find it. All right. And the issue with this as well is that once it has to be constantly inhabited by a single individual since the time that the apartment was deemed as being rent stabilized. So that means that a single person has to have lived in that home until from like mid 1970s until now. You can only pass it along to a relative if you want to, pass the apartment on to someone. And they are highly prized. There are not a lot of them. And rent control is kind of the same thing. Like, it doesn't have the same, I don't think that rent controlled apartments have the same, historical requirements that rent stabilized apartments do. And rent stabilized apartments were predominantly created for the elderly and older New Yorkers who have been living here since the 70s. And rent controlled means that, again, it's established by the Rental Guidelines Board in New York City, where they decide what the cap on price is going to be for rent in New York City, okay? And they say that you can increase it by 2% every year. I've already said that. But that doesn't mean that you are never going to have a rent increase. It doesn't mean that the cost of that apartment when you go to purchase it is going to be that. Why? Because let's say that the original owner who had the rent stabilized apartment or the rent controlled apartment. If they die and the apartment is then released back onto the market, it's no longer rent stabilized. Like, typically when it goes back onto the market, your landlords and everything are going to do modifications, and they're going to renovate the apartment so that they can charge more. Because why would you want to be undercutting your profit and be renting an apartment below the average median cost of an apartment in New York City? All right, it doesn't make financial sense. All right, especially considering that real estate is one of the largest economic industries in the city. All right, so rent stabilization and, you know, the creation of 200,000 housing units, where? Right? So, and also, sure, you may be building 200,000 units, but there's no clarification of whether those 200,000 units are going to be luxury apartments, whether they're going to be accessible income apartments, low income apartments. And if you're looking at where most of the development for this is happening, these are gentrified neighborhoods. They're not going to be low income housing for your, you know, low income people, right? Like, one of the big projects right now is Gansevoort Square. Now, Gansevoort Square is right by the Standard Hotel in Meatpacking. Are you telling me that you think that apartment building in Chelsea, right next to the Standard Hotel, you think that's going to be affordable housing? Wake up and smell the capitalism, baby, because no, that's not the way that's going to work. All right. Now, while my camera was cooling off, I went and I did a couple more bits of research on the whole tax the rich thing. Okay. So 48% of New York City and New York State's revenue is from taxing 1% of the population. 48% of the revenue of New York State and New York City is from 1% of the population. Okay? 48. And the current tax rate for millionaires in New York City is anywhere from 13.8% to 14.776% of income. All right, 10.9% of that is state, 3.86% of that is city. And Mamdani is talking about increasing that another 2%. So you're looking at a 16.8, let's just round it up, 16.8% tax rate on the quote unquote 1% and millionaires within New York City. And New York City has already experienced a decline in the millionaire population, or the population of residents who have a net worth and an income of $1 million or more. All right, there's already been a decline from this. It's been declining since pre-COVID. All right, so this is just going to exacerbate the problem. And 48%. And again, if these people leave, that means that that tax burden has to be taken up by everybody else. All right, someone has to pay for your MTA deficit. Somebody has to make up for the deficit at the MTA and all those free buses and all of the fare evasion, and and that's on top of all of the crumbling infrastructure that exists in the MTA as it is anyways. All right, then you've got to have more taxes to pay for all of that free universal child care. Then you're going to have more taxes to help pay for and subsidize those government-run grocery stores, all right, that historically we know operated a loss, and if they're lucky, operate for maybe a year or two before they go defunct. All right. So, you've got that. So 48% of this, the state and city revenue is based off of the 1% tax bracket. which is, I mean, and then you look at the largest industries in New York, okay? The three largest industries in New York City are finance, obviously, topping the charts at around 275 to 230 to 275 billion to 325 billion. All right, that's the financial sector within New York. So let's just say it's about 300 billion, right? You've got an average about 300 billion worth of economic revenue from the financial sector, okay? And then you have pro-business services, so companies like Boston Consulting Group, and stuff like that, where you're looking at 250 to 269 billion dollars worth of economic revenue. And then you have real estate, which is 250 to 269 billion dollars worth of economic revenue. Your three largest industries, which he's already talked about increasing the corporate tax rate on all of those companies, which New York is no longer required to be the hub of financial transactions in the US because we no longer use a telegraph line that goes underneath the ocean to communicate with the rest of the world to decide, the timing of financial transactions. You can be a financial trader anywhere with the advent of, Wi-Fi, the internet, and the modern era. All right, so don't think that financial institutions are tied to New York City. And if you're a financial institution and you're going to be taxed more and have a higher corporate tax rate, why would you stay? There's already been a significant drop in corporations, financial institutions that are operating in New York City now anyways, due to COVID and the recognition that you don't have to be in New York to be a financial institution anymore. So you're going to lose that industry. And if you think that this is not going to impact real estate, you're out of your mind, because why would real estate people capitulate to, this affordable housing? No. If you think that landlords and real estate, a lot of real estate in New York is owned by corporations. It's owned by large corporations. And if you think large corporations are going to put up with, increased taxes and a, decreased revenue based off of rent, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. All right. And and then when you look at what the largest employers, the flip side of that, so your largest economic drivers are the finance industry, your professional and business services, and real estate, okay? And the tax revenue from the 1%, all right? Those are your four largest forms of revenue within New York State and fund the economy, okay? And who are the largest employers? Well, it's not those companies. It's not those sectors. The largest employers in New York City are the City of New York, the MTA, and the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation. Okay? Those are the largest employers in the city. And who pays for that? Where does their paycheck money come from? Comes from your tax dollars. So what do you think is going to happen when the 48% of your tax revenue from income disappears and your three largest, economic sectors disappear? I can't believe that we have to sit down and even have this discussion of how this works, right? And why this is just an unbelievably horrible idea, all right? But hey, here we are. Apparently some of y'all still think that Mamdani, socialism, and communism are the way of the future. And babies, grow up. Grow the fuckity fruck frack fruck up, okay? Grow up. Grow up and come to terms with the privilege that you innately have as a citizen of the United States, okay? Because do you know what's not going to get you into an upwardly mobile economic situation? Communism and socialism, all right? It's not. And you cannot expect an economy based on capitalism to function under a socialist government. It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. And it's all going to go to shit. So, welcome. Welcome to the New York City. And all I can hope is that this is the painful learning lesson that is needed to snap you out of this delusion that socialism and communism can be successful. All right? And for those of you that want to shout out China as being a successful communist country, go visit China, babies. Go visit China. Go visit China. Go talk to someone who is a Chinese immigrant who is older than the age of 45. All right? Go talk to people who immigrated here during Mao's, I just, and the reality is that, yes, China is a authoritarian, dictatorial, communist country, but they have made allowances, very limited ones, that within the financial sector to become a extremely limited free market state-sponsored capitalist, or to have, let me rephrase that, they have, it is an authoritarian communist dictatorialship with limited free market reforms for state-sponsored capitalism, okay? Like, my God, I can't believe that we're having to even have this conversation, and that you're ignorant. You're ignorant. You need to grow up. You need to smell the roses, and you need to recognize your own privilege that has been provided to you by a capitalist economy. Like, grow up, because this is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's embarrassing. And ladies, again, I was going to say I hate to be the one to tell you, but I don't, because somebody needs to tell you. It's financial illiteracy, and the only barrier keeping you from long-term financial success is you. It's you. It's not the glass ceiling. It's not the patriarchy. It's not, unequal, rights for women. No, it's you and your lack of financial literacy and your inability to recognize that having enormous amounts of credit card debt, education debt, and not getting a control over your personal expenditure and living beyond your means is impacting your financial viability, okay? And I say that as someone who has lived it, all right? Grow up, because this is ridiculous. Have a good one, y'all.